Hello again, and welcome back to the Solving Basketball podcast. Today's guest is Sam Vecenie. You know him from The Athletic, where he is a senior writer, and he's also host of his own podcast, the Game Theory Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, Sam. I appreciate it.
Jordan, I can't even begin to say how honored I am to be on your podcast. I've been listening to your podcast since the moment that you started it. It is so good. Everything that you've put out this year, since you've jumped into the media, has been amazing. I'm thrilled to be on this podcast right now.
Well, thank you so much. We talked at the Final Four, this past Final Four, when I had all these ideas in my head, didn't know if I was going to go through with it or not. So you did play a pretty big role in that, and I thank you very much. You've been receptive to all my questions throughout, so thank you.
Yeah, no, to me, it's like an important part to like help people as they get into this, because if like I don't help people get into this, then we're going to keep having like shitty media takes throughout the course of like the media, where people just talk about wins and losses and, oh, this is a great win. Like Kim English tweeted about this a couple days ago. Like so much of the content within college basketball media is, oh, this is a great win. This is how it affects their NCAA tournament berth. Like there's more to it. There's more context. There's more that we should talk about in regard to all of the different styles that teams play. Like NC State presses like crazy. And then you've got Virginia in the same league who will play NC State later this year, who just totally reduces transition opportunities at all costs. And college basketball is like a beautiful tapestry in many ways. And I'm so glad to have someone like you around and so many others that kind of break down everything within that tapestry.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, that's where I think I've always gravitated towards college over the NBA, even though I do like NBA basketball and certainly appreciate it, but those styles and you can never run out of things to tweet about or make videos about, because there are 353 teams and way varying different skill sets on those teams. But we have to start out here with our usual question. I'm sure you're aware of it. If we went to a gym right now, I went under the hoop to rebound for you, and you shot 100 free throws, how many would you make in a row?
Oh, in a row?
Sorry.
Oh.
I asked my own question wrong. How many would you make out of 100?
Honestly, right now, probably like 50 or so. Like not a large amount. Once I got into a rhythm, I'd probably be pretty okay. Shooting free throws is one of the few things that I'm capable of doing competently on a basketball floor. But I just haven't done it in a long enough time. Like if we went out right now, it would be carnage. I think I'd be Udoka out there.
What is basketball? What is this basketball? Is that basketball? What is basketball?
So I think this always begs the question, how did you get into breaking down basketball at such a high level, if you weren't, if you could only make 50 out of 100 right now, what was the process to that?
Yeah, so when I was in grad school, so I graduated from Ohio State as an undergrad and didn't do journalism really. Like my background is in like public relations more than journalism. And then I got a second major in film studies, and then got a master's degree at Carnegie Mellon, essentially as an MBA in the entertainment industry. So while I was doing that, I got a lot of free time basically, and just dove straight into basketball and started to write about basketball and started to really, break down everything that happens on a basketball floor. And to do that, I just like started to read as much as I could in terms of like people like Sebastian Pruitt, who now works for Oklahoma City, who did great work breaking down different sets and different plays. And Dylan Murphy also is another guy that used to work in the G League. I don't believe he does anymore. He might have gotten another job. He was with the Mad Ants as an assistant coach for a while. And then just bought different books to try and learn. And, I bought Basketball Without Paper to try and learn about the analytical side. And then I learned that there's this beautiful side of the game where we're trying to make basketball into almost like a problem-solving math equation, like solving basketball, as you said. But there's so much more to it than that. Like there are so many different ways that the context that each player and that each coach and that each scheme and each situation come up that you have to take it all into account. It's just a never-ending thing that keeps you interested in learning about the game and learning about different things. Like, look, like I'm in, quote unquote, like draft expert. Like, people call me that. I think it's like insane, but like I'm good at it and I can break down plays, but like I still text coaches. Like, for instance, like Cincinnati runs that goofy ass matchup zone, right? Like I still don't understand the reads that Cincinnati's players make within that matchup zone. I've asked Mick Cronin about it. Mick Cronin won't answer it because he knows that it's like kind of it's like an institutional secret that makes him so successful within his league. I've asked other coaches in the American Athletic Conference, and they're like, yeah, we don't really totally understand what the reads are either. We just like kind of try and beat it. We assume they're going to switch a lot of actions, but we're not entirely sure how it works. So like, I think that it's just always so important to remember that I think everyone at all times within this industry is constantly trying to learn. And that's what makes it so fun to me. And, to kind of jump back in, like I started my career, quote unquote, like working at Nielsen. Like I worked at Nielsen for a year doing like different stuff around, custom research basically for television networks. And I can't really go into like a crazy amount of detail on that because I'm sure that there are some sort of, different, what do you call them? NDAs or whatever that the company signs with Nielsen and with the companies themselves. But, like I got a background in analysis and in working with bigger data, and I try and meld those two things together and always did that even while I worked at Nielsen and was writing on the side. And eventually I got enough of an audience and got enough people who noticed my work that CBS called and was interested in doing more draft work. And, they hired me to do draft work, and I jumped on the Eye on College Basketball podcast with Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish and got to know some other people in the industry, and they've been incredibly helpful. And, it's just kind of gone from there, I guess.
Got it. Yeah. And so that makes sense for how you have the analytics, the scouting, all of it into one. For me personally, so I got into the analytics in high school, and that's when I started my blog, but I don't think I've ever told this story on the podcast. In high school, I used to go on this like coaching message board and trade DVD coaching videos of like Syracuse 2-3 zone and what else? The Carolina fast break. And
that's amazing.
I was doing this in high school, watching, like, I never played for a coach that ran pack line. We were always force baseline and deny, and you just know what your coaches did. And so that in high school, even though I was becoming this analytics guy, I was always really, really into the X's and O's. And I think that is what has led me down this path.
Yeah, like when I learned basketball, like I learned like the Bobby Knight, like motion offense, right? And then you like learn there are a lot of different variations. There are a lot of different sets that you can run out of that like no one that I was taught from ever considered or like ever tried to, actualize on the floor with, people. So yeah, I think that everyone tries to learn from everyone else in this industry. And it's a really, for me, mostly it's been an extremely positive atmosphere. Like I have people that will say, I don't know shit. And I'll be like, yeah, I probably agree with that. But I really try and work as hard as I can to learn and try to, figure out everything that is happening within this industry. And I think that if I'm going to write about something, I need to have watched, probably 6 or 7 games of tape. Like I just watched Jarrett Culver. I've now seen every single shot, every single possession that he's ended this year. I've watched 7 or 8 of their games this year. And like I have like a pretty good feel for what they're doing. Like their defense is incredibly complicated and they run like different defensive like variations from time to time, even within their man. Like they'll switch on ball screens sometimes, like they did against Duke. They'll play like a 2-3 zone sometimes, like they did against UT Rio Grande Valley. They'll play a more of like a base, like conservative pack line scheme, which is where Chris Beard got his start occasionally. So like, I think that if I'm going to write about something and analyze, what Jarrett Culver is as a prospect, I need to know everything that goes into the context behind what makes Jarrett Culver who he is. That's
a great point. I actually saw when I tweeted some Texas Tech stuff, I think it was Jackson Hoy, who's a NBA draft guy I'm sure you're aware of from Twitter. Mm-hmm. He said that it helps to know that Texas Tech is forcing baseline because it almost feels like Texas Tech players are just letting people drive by them, but that's the scheme as long as it's baseline, right?
Yeah, it is. I do think in Culver's case, he will often kind of take shitty angles within that like driving baseline. Like he'll go too high on like the middle side and just create too big of a lane for a guy to get downhill. You watch some of their other guards, they don't really necessarily do that. They're a little bit more aggressive in the way that they attack a guy's hip, for instance. But nonetheless, that's 100% right. They want to force everything baseline. Like again, that goes back to pack line. Pack line tends to try and force as much baseline as they can and try and dissuade middle penetration because they know that once a team gets middle penetration, it's incredibly difficult to slow them down.
Yeah, so we are going to tap into all of this video watching and context that you have. And the idea for this podcast is for listeners that have listened to the past, I had Gibson Piper on and we did a draft where we each picked our top 5 coaches to run a program that had even talent. They didn't have any control over who their players were going to be. And the hardest thing to do draft episodes like this is finding someone who can talk in depth on, in that case, coaches, and in today's case, players. So specifically, we're going to be focusing on non-NBA prospects, or at least just not the top NBA prospects. And this came about from a Twitter discussion that we had. I did a couple of videos on Jordan Ford and Frankie Ferrari, and you replied with some thoughts on Jordan Ford. So before we start going back and forth picking guys, I'll let you talk a little bit about Jordan Ford.
I love Jordan Ford. It's funny, like, we were texting back and forth earlier, and you had mentioned that, like, you guys had played Jordan Ford, and like last year, he wasn't what he is this year, right? I think that's pretty fair to say.
Yep.
He was much more inefficient in his actions. He was not. He was a playmaker more than an efficient scorer, which is fine. Like every team needs guys who can just straight up create shots at the end of shot clocks. And because he's so fast and so quick and has so much burst, like he was capable of doing that. And you look at his numbers, like he had a 61 true shooting percentage. He shot 44% from 3. Like this potential was there last year, but it wasn't actualized in a way that that made him like a wholly efficient and useful player. They had Jock Lawndale. He was playing a lot more off the ball next to Emmett Nar. They had incredible spacing because of Nar, because of Hermanson, because Tanner Krebs was around. Even like a guy like Evan Fitzner, who is on Indiana right now, who's an incredible floor spacer in the games that he played last year. So you look at what the context around Jordan Ford was last year, and he was just kind of a different guy. This year, he is just an absolute superstar in terms of what his usage versus his efficiency is. Like you watch the way that he dominates ball screen actions. You watch the way that he can maneuver around big guys and make shots with incredible body control and incredible hang time around the basket. His floater game is incredible. He is a genuine 3-level scorer now. He's a 3-level pull-up scorer, like consistently. You talked about this in the video that you did. I love what they do whenever they'll run like some split action with him and Malik Fitz or him and someone else, where they'll use him as a screener and then have him sprint off of, the roll essentially off of the screen. They'll sprint off of it, accept a handoff, and he'll either get into the lane or he'll just pull up from behind the screener and knock down a shot. It's really, really difficult to guard him right now because of how hard he plays, how hard he runs off of screens, how quick, how jittery he is, how much control he has over the ball constantly, and because of how much of a threat he is as a pull-up all over the floor.
One thing that's interesting about Ford is there's like YouTube videos of when he was really little doing Micah Lancaster drills, which like I'm not sure how familiar you are with Micah Lancaster, but it's like medicine ball, 2-ball dribbling, some things that have come across nowadays in skill development as potentially gimmicks, but he's way more skilled than most guards in college basketball with the floater and the finishing and that kind of stuff. So he's almost like a test case for the props, the props type of skill development.
Oh yeah, it's true. I don't know what to make of the whole prop training development scene. That's it's so funny. Like you talk to trainers, and there's like so much like infighting among trainers in terms of like what's the best way to do something. And at the end of the day, like game reps are the most important thing. Being able to understand and have a high IQ about what is happening around you on the floor within a competitive atmosphere. As long as you're going to work hard off the floor and as long as you're going to do things that are translatable to those scenarios, I don't know that there's like a right or wrong way to go about this stuff. But in Ford's case, it's certainly has played out that he did something right when he was younger because he keeps the ball on a string constantly. He has that low Steph Curry release point on his pull-up game so that it's really, really difficult to get a hand there and react quick enough once he decides to pull up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then in terms of learning to play the game, and he's obviously in very good hands with Randy Bennett there too, so that helps quite a bit.
Randy is a cheat code, man. That dude it's just unbelievable. Some of the actions he'll run. He'll run like crazy horns variations. He, runs that split action he has for a few years, just anytime that he has a guard that can really, really shoot the ball like Ford can. What he does in terms of playing 4 out, 1 in, and he doesn't really even have the 1 in this year. So he's had to kind of vary what he does in terms of the actions that he runs. You do see a little bit more horns this year, in my opinion, than what you've seen in the past from him. Like a lot of the time it was more, he has Jock Londale or, like Omar Samhan go down and establish early post position. They'll run like a pick and roll with the point guard and Londale/Samhan. They use that role with Londale to establish position in the post. They'll kick it out to a wing, dump it into the post. It's just, it's really, really impressive in terms of the way he's had to adjust this year. In half-court offense, they have a team with like Jordan Ford and like Malik Fitz, who was a cast-off essentially at South Florida, is their second best player, and they have a top 20 offense in the country right now. Randy Bennett is, for me, one of the 5 best half-court offensive coaches in the country.
Yeah, I agree. And Londale was a little bit prevalent in that San Francisco loss. San Francisco did a good job. They really, really pressured Ford. He had a good game, but most of it wasn't in half-court offense. A lot of it was in transition or just like breakdowns. And so that leads us to the other person that was featured in those little videos I made, Frankie Ferrari, who is San Francisco's starting point guard. Everyone says best name in college basketball, which might be true, but he also is really, really good. And he is my favorite type of college basketball player, and that is a pass first. He obviously can score, and he's been very efficient this year, but pass first, ball screen point guard who doesn't necessarily have NBA potential or aspirations, but he is. If you just looked at the stat sheet and if you just looked at the tools of some of San Francisco's players, he might not be the one that stands out, but he has the ball so much and he just makes great decisions. He doesn't turn the ball over. And I think those guys are underrated because, like I said, they don't have that NBA potential, and like he doesn't have a super high usage rate. So that's what my Frankie Ferrari rant.
Yeah, no, he's just such an incredibly fun player, as you said. Like the way that he runs the pick and roll just totally initiates everything that San Francisco does on offense. Like you said, this isn't a team that has honestly like much offensive talent. I mean, like they're shooting 33% from three right now. They aren't an incredible shooting team. But the way that he knows how to manipulate ball screens and manipulate defenders within ball screens and get the help to come up to him or to, find a way to kind of snake through the defense and snake through ball screens and, maybe get to a pull-up shot, but most of the time it's to make plays for others. And the fact that he is running this offense as a guy who is not necessarily lighting the world on fire as a jump shooter, like he's been a pretty consistent 39 to 35% three-point shooter over the course of his career. It's really, really impressive. And the biggest thing that he's done this year, in my opinion, is he makes less like terrible, shitty decisions than he did in the past. Like the last few years, like as a freshman, for instance, he didn't play a ton of minutes. You look at the turnover rate, 29.5. Then as a sophomore was more of a backup type, 17.9 turnover rate. Last year, it was still up around 16. This year, it's down at 13. And for a lead guard who has the ball in his hands as much as he does, a 13% turnover rate is just a really, really remarkable number, especially, again, when you consider the fact that guys kind of know that he's trying to make plays for others more than for himself.
Right. And then on the other side of the ball, San Francisco is a really, really good defensive team. And he didn't start, neither Ford nor Ferrari started out guarding each other at all. But towards the second half, Ferrari did guard Ford. I'm not sure if it was intentional or just on switches. And I actually liked his foot speed on Ford. He did a pretty good job. San Francisco had a backup guard, Bouye, who his job was, I think, to come in and just bother Ford, and he did a good job. But Ferrari impressed me. He doesn't have the length defensively, but he was better than I would have thought for sure on defense.
Yeah, he has quick feet. I mean, he knows how to pressure at the point of attack. He has smart hands. Is like guys like him and like Ty Jerome, for instance, at Virginia, is a guy that really, really impresses me with his handwork, to just try and do little things to disrupt opposing players, despite like Ty Jerome 6'4", but he is like a negative wingspan. Frankie Ferrari 6 foot, not a guy that has much in the way of defensive tools, in my opinion, but knows how to use his hands, knows how to get up in a guy's grill and just really disrupt what's happening more than anything.
I would agree. And I think in general, that's a good word to describe San Francisco's defense.
Guy that deserves a shout out on that. I've been told that Todd Golden does a lot of work, their associate head coach, along with Kyle Smith and that entire staff. But I've been told that Todd Golden's the guy that should get a good amount of credit for defense at San Francisco.
Okay, well, no, I like that. San Francisco is a friend of the podcast. Kyle Smith has been on. And so, yeah, I like that for sure. So let's get into picking some players now. I'll let you go first. There's not a very strict criteria for this, but whether it's our favorite non-top NBA players or guys that we think are just better college players than NBA guys, it's just mostly a format to talk about different guys. So you can go first.
Yeah, so like just in terms of the way that I did this whenever I made my list, I did it by saying guys who are considerably better college players than they are prospects. Like, I've done this long enough now to know that I shouldn't necessarily rule out players from playing in the NBA. Like, a good example of this, I'm sure that 4 years ago, TJ McConnell would have been on top of like both of our lists, right? And here's TJ McConnell. He's carved out a nice little 4-year career. He's probably going to get a reasonably sized contract as a second contract in the NBA next year. Like, I think it's just worth saying, like, these guys tend to have incredibly high IQs, and that tends to just really work at the next level because you're playing with genuine basketball geniuses in the NBA. So like, my first pick is Ethan Happ, and I don't mean to say like Ethan Happ can't play in the NBA, but like Ethan Happ is a genuine top 10 college basketball player, and basically has been a top 10 college basketball player since the time that he was like a sophomore, realistically. Like, he was a really good freshman, but probably wasn't quite to that level yet. As a sophomore though, like, he was just incredible and unbelievable. And you just look at what he's able to bring to the table as an offensive hub. I mean, he is that ridiculous post move where he just knows how to go baseline on you basically every time for an up and under. He's an unbelievable defensive rebounder and has gotten better at that this year. He's a good offensive rebounder. He has become a guy who can handle some stuff in short rolls, but more than that, his passing acumen comes from finding a way to get defensive attention with a double team and then kick out, which is something, by the way, he really struggled with early in his career. Like even last year, he really struggled whenever the double would come. He didn't really have a great feel for how to handle those situations. You'd see him turn the ball over a lot, either via just mishandling the basketball or, kind of throwing it away just because he wasn't really comfortable with the pressure yet. This year, he's very, very good at that. He's a 34.8% assist rate, which is 30th in the entire country. He has a turnover rate that's below 14, which again, for a guy with his usage rate, which is 7th in the entire country, it's just really, really impressive. He knows how to get to the foul line. I know he can't shoot free throws. That's ultimately, I think, going to be a big thing that holds him back from playing in the NBA because teams will just start hacking him. And anytime he's on the floor, it's going to be a net negative for them at the end of the day. But I'm a big Ethan Happ guy. He executes well within their defensive scheme. He has great feet, very disruptive with his hands, pretty good shot blocker, pretty good rim protector, despite a lack of, traditional elite shot blocker measurements. Just an overall incredibly smart, incredibly high IQ player that I think fits this criteria more than anyone. He is the poster child for something like this.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I had a graph earlier in the year of just how unique his assist rate is given his height in the country this year, but I would imagine historically too. I didn't go back further than this year, but there's not too many 6'10" guys or whatever he's listed at who can pass like he does, or even just being used in that way to have that many assists. So I will get my pick started off here. And I think maybe some people have seen me talk about him on Twitter. He is my favorite player in college basketball at this point, I guess. That is Gonzaga's point guard, Josh Perkins. So what I've found when people are talking about Gonzaga is that college basketball people love Hachimura. NBA draft people love Brandon Clark. And personally, I love Josh Perkins. So first of all, I want to hear why he isn't in your top 100 NBA draft prospects. I am not someone who follows this stuff at all, so I really had to go and look at your top 100 to make sure. But let's start with that, I guess.
So streakiness and turnovers, I would say, are the big things. He is just pretty careless with the ball from time to time. I think he does a really good job of initiating what Gonzaga wants within its sets. He's a really, really underrated defender too. I think like he does key their defense at the point of attack at a much higher level, for instance, than he did early in his career. And at a higher level than what I think he gets credit for most of the time. Like it's not just the steals, it's the fact that he's pretty good as an on-ball pressure guy as well. Good shooter, obviously, can make catch and shoot shots at a high level. He's been a consistent 38 to 40% 3-point shooter over the course of his career. 6'3", not like crazy length, if I remember correctly, but you maybe like a +2 or so in that measurement. Just not quite a dynamic enough lead guard for what you have to be at the next level. And like, look, if he really focuses in and becomes like an elite level defender that can consistently make 40% of his threes, I would understand. Like I would understand a team for sure bringing him in for training camp, but I don't know necessarily that he brings enough as a dynamic shot creator for himself or for others in comparison to what you need to be to play at that next level.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I've always wondered how much of that is skill versus like desire. Sometimes it just does not seem like he wants to score. But again, it's like with the Ferrari thing. If you go to his KenPom page, his usage is really low. But I watch Gonzaga and he always has the ball in his hands. They run so much for him. And I know Nylon Calculus at one point, they probably still do, had a true usage rating that factored in assists that maybe would better serve a player like Josh Perkins. But the biggest thing to me is we would always, in scouting teams that run a lot of ball screens, with which Gonzaga does, we would always look at their top ball screen guys and see which passes they're able to make. So believe it or not, some high-level college basketball guards, if you chart it out, like never hit the roll man, or they never hit the roll up guy, which is the guy in the corner. Yep. And that, like Josh Perkins, he, at any time when he's coming off a ball screen, he can hit four guys equally. And that is a huge skill to have. And to me, the biggest reason why Gonzaga is number one in adjusted offensive efficiency now, they have so much talent. I'm sure they would make it work without Josh Perkins. But under their current system, to me, he's the most important in that system.
I think I would agree with that. Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, Rui just draws so much attention to himself that he opens up a lot of different avenues for everyone else. Brandon Clark is such a weird gravitational force in terms of the way that you have to defend him going up around the rim. But I think I would agree with you that he's probably their most important guy, just like you said, given the amount of ball screens that he runs, given how integral he is to initiating their offensive sets, given that he does make a lot of plays for others coming out of those ball screen actions. Yeah, I think that's probably right. Again, like for me, it's just like separation whenever you're one-on-one with a guy. I think that whenever he gets like one-on-one with on an island with a guy that is similarly quick and similarly as long as him, he struggles to make decisions in those worlds.
Gotcha. Yeah. So let's get your pick number 2.
Oh man, I didn't do an order here, so this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna go with Mike Daum, I think.
Okay.
Mike Daum is a guy that gets like some NBA draft love. What I'm worried about with Mike Daum at the NBA level is the fact that he plays a lot of, like, he mostly just plays the small ball center for South Dakota State. Really, for that level, it's not like a small ball center. He's like 6'9", 240 pounds. It's totally reasonable. It's just the way that he operates and the way that he plays makes it act like more of a skill ball center is the way to put it. What I'm worried about with him at the next level is he tried to take off weight this summer to make him more of a useful, quicker defender. And it just didn't take. You read everything that he talked about after they did their, I believe, Canada trip. And he said he just didn't feel comfortable without the weight. And he thought that he played poorly without the weight on his body. It makes me think that at the end of the day, he's probably going to be more of a bigger bodied, center at the next level. And I don't really think he brings enough to the table as a rim protector or as likely as a defensive rebounder, just given the freaks that play in the NBA, to play the center position at his size. So I think he's probably a Euro guy, and he's going to make a ton of money overseas in Europe because, man, is that guy just an unbelievable shooter, just an absolutely elite shooter. He can knock down shots off of movement. They run like these like weird, sometimes like elevator sets, it looks like, where he'll come up through, and like to do this for a setter is like insane. Like he'll come up through a ball screen, turn on a dime, and like not even be looking at the basket, and he'll catch and just turn his body half the time in midair, half the time like just like immediately before going up for the jump shot. And he just knocks them all down. It's unbelievable. He's similar to a guy that ultimately got drafted, but didn't end up making it, in Alec Peters. I think Peters was a guy that really could shoot it off of movement. Daum is also an unbelievable post player as well. They can just throw him the ball on the block, and he's going to create a pretty efficient look with a hook shot or with a drop step. Just a very, very good player, in my opinion, that probably ends up being more of a Euro guy than an NBA guy.
The only South Dakota State game I've seen so far this year was Nevada, and Daum was in foul trouble that game and just had a bad game, so I haven't gotten a good look at him. I have a related question about Daum for you. Transferring is a topic that I've gone into on a podcast, and just from an NBA perspective, what would your advice have been to him with the possibility of a grad transfer?
Oh man, that's a tough one. NBA executives are very familiar with his game at this stage. Like everyone has been out to see him at some point that matters over the course of the last 3 years, or has seen him in the NCAA tournament, because he's been lucky enough that they've made the NCAA tournament each of the 3 years that he's been there. Man, it still would have helped to be able to see him. Like if he would have proven that he could do what he does against higher level athletes, like in the Big Ten, like the team that everyone brought up with Dom was Nebraska because he's from Kimball, Nebraska. Right. Getting to do it against Big Ten competition, I think that might have helped him a little bit if he would have continued to average like 20 points a night. But I still think that the factors of his foot speed, just being like a tweener 4-5 type, probably would have played a bigger role than just like doing it against elite competition time in, time out. Sometimes you have to prove it against guys, and I get that, but if whatever he was comfortable with, I think guys were going to find him and see him.
So with my next pick, I am going with Virginia's Jack Salt. And
I love it.
First of all, this is not one where I'm going to be questioning why he's not in your top 100 or anything like that. We're in agreement there. The first time I saw Jack Salt, or I shouldn't say first time I saw him, but the first time I really focused on him was ironically against Ethan Happ, your first pick. They asked him to do a lot. So Virginia hedges ball screens. That's kind of a staple of Tony Bennett's offense. And they stopped doubling the post that game because Happ had looked good against the post double. And so Salt was hedging a ball screen and then had to immediately defend like a cross screen or some type of action and not let Happ get too good a post position. It was as much burden to put on a player as you pretty much can, and he did a really, really good job. He, in general, at ball screens, he's really, really mobile. Obviously, he's had years of Tony Bennett drill work, and that's got to be part of it. But he does what Tony Bennett does. Once he's not going to score in the post. He has offensive limitations, but he really fits that blocker role for Virginia.
He is so much fun. Just so much fun. He's a crunching screen setter on offense. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that Ty Jerome gets as much separation as he does whenever they run him in ball screens. And like they'll run Kyle Guy off of like baseline screens involving Jack Salt pretty regularly. It's just he's such a good screen setter, knows exactly how to make contact, knows that if he makes contact, he might be able to get free for a second for a little shot at the basket, but he's obviously aware that that's not his game. Does a great job on the offensive glass too, creating second chances, just like those little tip outs that he'll do. And, the defense is the key, as you mentioned. He is so good at hard hedging and recovering. It's a really, really impressive sight to watch his footwork every single night. And yeah, you mentioned that Wisconsin game. That is the encapsulation of what Jack Salt brings to the table. Virginia is a team that loves to double the post. They want to do it as much as they can. Like if you remember, for instance, like the Darian Atkins team, like Darian Atkins was an awesome college defender, just an unbelievable useful piece for them. And they would double every single time that he got posted because he was just 6'8" and 240 pounds. And, was a good post defender and was a good shot blocker, but he wasn't, capable of handling a lot of the bigger guys on his own. The difference between Salt and Atkins is that Salt is big enough and that Salt can take on those one-on-one matchups in the post, which allows Virginia to get even more creative in the way that they try and apply heavy ball pressure, which is another super important staple of what they run defensively.
You mentioned the offensive rebounding, which is a sneaky big skill for Virginia, who they don't run in transition that much. They don't get a ton of easy baskets. So getting second chance opportunities is really big. In my mind, Tony Bennett was not a guy who likes to crash the glass and offensive rebound, but I looked at his KenPom page, and in the last 5 or so years, there seems to have been a switch a little bit. And I think I looked, and Salt is the only guy that was a better offensive rebounder, I think, is Anthony Gill, maybe, in this little run. But he adds a lot of value there on offense, and the screen setting too. And then on those ball screens, I think I'm going to do a video on this eventually, but he has this knack. It's almost bad defense, I feel like, but as he's going out to hedge, he swipes down on the ball a little bit, and he's got quick hands, and I think he has a bunch of steals this year where this offhand that he almost cheats on. I'm not sure if that's something that they're teaching, or they're naturally really good at it. But yeah, big Jack Salt fan. So we both have 2 now. What's your number 3?
I'm going to go with Sam Merrill at Utah State.
Yep.
Watching Sam Merrill just run guys through the ringer off the ball with the variety of screens that Utah State sets for him off the ball is insane. Like, Lou Dort is a really good on-ball defender. And they thought, Arizona State, I'm sure, was thinking, you know what, we're going to put Lou Dort. He's our best defender. He's 6'4", he's 6'9" wingspan, 220 pounds, built like a tank. And we're going to match him up with Sam Merrill, and maybe he'll bother 6'4", 200 pound Sam Merrill into taking some bad shots. Well, that didn't exactly happen. Sam Merrill wrecked him to the tune of 27 points and made, I think he was like 8 for 18 from the field, got to the foul line and son. It was incredibly impressive to watch Sam Merrill. And he's an unbelievable passer coming off of those screens too. He passes it on the move. It's such a high level. He picks out the guys immediately, just knows how to diagnose a defense in the way that they defended him coming off of screens so regularly. I would hesitate to say he's like a real NBA prospect. Guys who can move off the ball like he can and can shoot like he can will always get a chance. He also has the added benefit of Utah State having a really interesting center prospect right now that NBA scouts are trying to get out and see, and Neemias Quetta, 6'11" kid, 7'4" wingspan, really high level shot blocker, rebounder, rim runner type. So maybe Merrill gets seen a little bit more, but just watching that dude run off of screens constantly and just destroy guys and get separation despite not being a traditionally high level athlete is one of the most fun things that I have seen in college basketball yet this year.
Yeah, and Utah State is one of the most improved teams in the country relative to their preseason expectations. Obviously, they have a new coach in Craig Smith this year. How much do you think, why do you think that they have exceeded those expectations? Is it the development of Sam Merrill and some of those guys, or is it Craig Smith, do you think?
Well, I think that more than anything, you look at their numbers, the defense has improved dramatically. It's like not even a debate in terms of where they were last year versus where they are now. Craig Smith is a pretty good defensive coach. If you look back through his timeline, had a top 70 defense last year at South Dakota State, which is pretty hard to do, just given the quality of competition that South Dakota State plays. Top 130 the year before that. They were pretty tough the first 2 years that he was there, but those last 2 years and then this year, he's been very good as a defensive coach. I think, again, you can look at Quetta. They're one of the best teams against 2-point shots in the entire country. That guy is just he blocks out the sun when guys try and go in there and finish shots around the basket. So I would say the defensive improvement is the biggest piece of the puzzle here. They're also a very good defensive rebounding team. Again, Quetta plays a role there, but they also have this like 6'5" like dude who plays a bunch of minutes, like is a combo 3-4, Diogo Brito. He's like a really good tough rebounder despite lacking size. Like Dwayne Brown's like another guy that's like kind of undersized that just does a really good job of attacking the glass for them. They just do a really good job of staying disciplined throughout an entire game and knowing what their scheme is, sinking everyone into the middle and doing a reasonable job of getting out on 3-point shooters. I would say that is the number one thing, but none of that involves Sam Merrill, and that's okay because Sam Merrill is doing yeoman's work on offense to get loose every single possession.
So, yeah, the Mountain West has had a disappointing start. Utah State's an exception, Fresno State too. But I am going to stay in the Mountain West for my pick, and he has been on the podcast here, and it's going back a little bit too. I'm curious to see why he is not in your top 100, and that is Jordan Caroline at Nevada.
So I do have Jordan Caroline on my list here too. It's funny.
Oh, okay.
So I have long kind of considered whether or not I should rank Caroline. And at the end of the year, whenever guys like decide to return to school, so like my list will diminish by like 30 guys or 40 guys, right? Like somewhere in that range. It's typically somewhere between 30 and 40. So then that allows 30 seniors most of the time, or guys who declare early that probably shouldn't, to move on to the list and matriculate. And Jordan Caroline will be in the top 100 by the end of the year. I have no doubt about that. So that's kind of why I didn't personally take him here, despite the fact that he is on my list. The things that worry me with Caroline are that he's not a particularly high-level leaper. You watch him try and finish in the lane. He struggles when dealing with size. He just kind of tries to go into the body and draw fouls pretty consistently. Additionally, I know he's shooting like 41% from three right now on like 3 or so attempts per game, which is a marked improvement. It's still just such a small sample in comparison to what we've seen from him in the past that I need to see more with him as a shooter. But one of the big things that I think folks underrate about draft prospects is the intersection of quickness and strength. And Jordan Caroline has that. He is 235 pounds, moves his feet really, really well defensively, can guard multiple positions most of the time. He's often tasked with guarding centers because that's what he is asked to do at Nevada. He certainly was asked to do that last year. This year they have Trey Porter, so it's not quite as often. But to me, I mean, Jordan Caroline's one of the 20 best players in the country. I love everything that he brings to the table for Nevada. You know, you can have your Martin twins. Give me Jordan Caroline every day of the week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he was sitting out when I was at Nevada, and this was years back, and he was still pretty young. I think he was 19, turning 20 that year, and I think most people in the program, just with the way he works, his skill set coming in, like there was never much of a doubt in our minds that he was going to be an NBA guy. Just projecting him almost, not in that second, but just knowing how hard he works and the body and gifts that he has. But it has been a little bit of a weird career at Nevada. It's been extremely productive, but like you said, he was playing center pretty much exclusively last year. The year before that, he was with Cam Oliver, so he was more as a 4. And now this year, he'll play 4 and some 3 if Jordan Brown or Trey Porter, and then they also have Trayshawn Thurman in the game. So he's been all over the place. I think that's an advantage at the next level, whatever level that is. You know, he's definitely a versatile guy. I agree with you on the shooting. I would have thought by now that he would have had a better track record shooting just by how much he was working on his shot, and that the form is not terrible.
The thing with Caroline's form, though, is it's a 2-motion jumper, which can be a little bit difficult to replicate.
To get off.
And get off consistently. He often and the biggest thing that'll affect is rhythm within your jump shot. And like a lot of the times he'll take shots that look like they're kind of out of rhythm. Never been really like an elite level free throw shooter by any stretch. I love the person, Jordan Caroline. Like I've met him, I've talked to him for like 30 minutes at a time. He is just a very special kid. And you mentioned the hard work. I mean, that kid, his reputation within that Nevada program is just constant, consistent work, and that's it. There's a lot of the line between him and Shimmy Ojale, for instance, like basically the same body, same, wonky shot profile, I think is probably the way to put it, right? Like Ojale similarly had a huge spike as a 4th-year guy, as Caroline has now as a 5th-year guy. I trusted Ojale to shoot more off of movement. A lot of Caroline's threes right now are like standstill shots. He took that like goofy ass like sidestep Dame 3 against New Mexico, and then he came down and did it again to try and like launch the comeback that he launched 2 years ago whenever they played down at the pit on Saturday when they played. I don't really trust him to do that realistically. I think he's more of a standstill shooter who is like a combo 4-5 at the next level. He'll get a chance. If you told me that Jordan Caroline ended up on a two-way next year, I would not be surprised.
Yeah, and at the very least, like you said, one of the best players in college basketball this year, and it'll be interesting to see. So now we are both 3 picks in. Who do you have for your next?
Oh, man. You know what? I'm going to give this guy a shout out. Chris Clemons, baby. Chris Clemons is going to finish his career as like one of the 5 best scorers in college basketball history, if I remember correctly. Just incredible how a guy that is 5'8", 180 pounds is so efficient finishing inside at the basket. He is shooting 61% from 2-point range this year, in spite of the fact of being 5'9", and in spite of the fact that like he takes a lot of pull-up shots too. Like there are some mid-range shots within that number. He is just such an incredibly fun player. The way that he'll manipulate ball screens, the way that if you get him on an island against a big, he's just blowing right by that guy every time. Even against little guards or like, normal sized guards, he's blown by those guys every single time. In terms of why he's not like an NBA prospect, he's 5'8", and it's incredibly difficult to defend at the next level at 5'8". If you remember Isaiah Thomas at Washington, he was actually like a really useful college defender who just got destroyed in the NBA every single time that a team would be able to get a switch on him, especially in today's NBA with switch conscious schemes that we see a lot of teams running. But I think it's just really worth shouting out Chris Clemons as one of the most underappreciated college careers that I can remember. That guy's averaging 29.3 points per game after averaging 25 points per game each of the last 2 years. So, shout out Chris Clemons.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm looking at Campbell's KenPom page right now. They're 166 in offense and 306 in defense. But that 166 is about as good as they were equal to that last year, but relative to what Campbell's been in recent years, he's clearly having his impact on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean it's really hard to defend with a guy that's 5'9" or 5'8" on the floor.
Right. And especially like you said in the NBA. I wonder, I would have to look at it, but I wonder how much college teams attack him or try to get him on switches. I'm not sure. I think coaches have more varying philosophies on that as opposed to the NBA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't watch enough like Big South basketball. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend to.
Same with me.
Yeah, I watched them play Georgetown this year, and he was obviously incredible. He dropped 45 on Georgetown. I think I might have watched like a couple of minutes of the Miami game when he dropped 19 and actually kind of struggled against their length and size a little bit. But, again, it's just like he deserves a shout out. The guy has just been an unbelievable offensive player. And he's, again, I think he's going to be like a top 5-ish scorer over the last like 40 years of college basketball.
So for my pick, when we did the coaches draft with Gibson Piper for my last pick, I went with Mark Pope from Utah Valley, a WAC coach, just someone who I was really familiar with from my time at New Mexico State. So that's kind of what I'm doing with this pick here, a player that we played against who had an impact on the game that you might not have seen. Again, in the vein of Jack Salt, not an NBA guy. And that is Clemson, who we played in the NCAA tournament, David Scara. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with Scara, but he started against us in the NCAA tournament. He wasn't normally a starter, and they started him. I don't know this for sure, but basically to just box out Jamario Jones, who was probably the best rebounder in the country last year. And Scara is, let's see, he's listed at 6'8", so he actually does have good height. That's taller than I would have said. But he did that. So Jamario did not have an offensive rebound at all in the first half. And he did have 3 of them in the second half, but 2 of them were when Scara was on the bench, and 1 of them was when Scara was contesting someone else's shot. So that wasn't on him, but it really did make a difference. And I've watched him a little bit this year, Scara, as well. Most recently, they played Duke, and he's been really efficient this year on the offensive end. So he's a dirty work guy who does the little things, but he's shooting 46% from 3 and 66% from 2 this year on very, very low usage. But obviously I had the personal story about him, but also just a role player that does little things that you have to really, really pay attention, I guess, to notice.
So it's funny, if I remember correctly, he declared for the draft essentially with the intention of turning pro overseas last year, because he's Croatian. It would make sense for a guy like him to actually have a real marketplace overseas, because again, 6'8", small ball 4, potential to shoot it at the very least. The numbers didn't back that up last year, but if you kind of go back to the Valpo days, he shot 33% as a 6'8" guy. I believe in his, it'd be a sophomore year, I guess.
Yep.
So, kind of an interesting player, as you mentioned, because he's very smart defensively. He's long, he's quicker than what you would expect. And I was at that New Mexico State Clemson game and was just not paying enough attention realistically to what was happening. Mm-hmm. And I did not notice him boxing out. That's funny that they started him. I noticed that they started him, but I did not realize that's why.
Yeah. It's the type of thing where you go through all this work. Obviously, the NCAA tournament is magnified, and then they end up specifically starting a guy. You're very curious as to why that is, and then as the game's unfolding, it's wait, why isn't Jamario around the basket as much in this first half? And he was the biggest reason why. In general, they play this, it's passive aggressive style of defense that just really, really hurt us. They're not a super denial team or anything like that, but there's nowhere to drive, and we just could not get going against their defense. And then the fact that we couldn't get our normal second chance opportunities was in large part thanks to Scara.
Yeah, that's funny. That's really funny. Couple of do you want to run through a couple of guys real quick that you had on your list and that I've got on mine?
Yep, some honorable mentions. Yep.
So I've got Jarek Harding here, who is just an unbelievable pull-up shooter from Weber State. I've got Justin Wright Foreman. I think Justin Wright Foreman is kind of a known commodity at this stage, just around college basketball, as one of the best scorers in college basketball right now, full stop. I enjoy watching Kenny Goins at Michigan State, just because he is an incredible defensive rebounder who is carved out a role as a starter after being a walk-on for 2 years of his career. He just does all of the dirty work, little things that you just don't show up in the box score at all. And then you look up and, he's got 0 points and 16 rebounds or something like that. Who else do you have?
Let's see. I have Tariq Owens at Texas Tech. We were talking about Texas Tech a little bit. He makes them go as a rim protector, basically. He's not that bad offensively. I don't think they help him out too much with the style that they play, but yeah, I like him a lot. Nick Perkins at Buffalo. He's their sixth man, but he plays starter minutes. CJ Massenberg gets all the fanfare there, but Perkins hasn't his numbers. He hasn't been super efficient this year, but talking to the San Francisco staff after they played him, they felt like they did a great job on Massenberg and the guards, and that Perkins was the one that hurt him. And I really like his game. Would like to see that 3-point percentage go up a little bit. Jared Harper at Auburn, and then another even shorter guard, Chris Likes at Miami. He's just exciting to watch. Chris Likes.
One guy that I want to bring up is I didn't draft this guy because I think he actually might have like a very real NBA chance, is Corey Davis at Houston.
Yep.
Just a very, very good shooter who is also pretty darn near elite defender as a small guard. I can see a world where he gets a real NBA chance. So like, I just kind of didn't draft him. The more I watch him, the more I like him, and the more I think he's probably going to be on my top 100 at the end of the year. And, he's a guy that isn't like Ethan Happ in that way. Like Ethan Happ will be on my top 100, but Ethan Happ is like a top 10 player in the country. So the dissonance is real there. Corey Davis is probably like a top 100 player in college basketball, probably going to be a top 100 guy on my board at the end of the year. But, the way that he defends on the ball, the way that he gets up in your grill and fights through screens off the ball, he keys everything that undefeated Houston team does. And I think deserves a lot of credit for that.
One guy who I want to get your opinion on, and this is like I was saying, how there's so many different styles of play in college basketball, but there's also so many different types of players. So I love watching how they incorporate him, and that's Taco Fall. What do you think of him?
Yeah, just a very fun player. I don't think he's an NBA player. He makes like a very real impact for UCF, especially when they run that zone, because again, much like I mentioned with Neemias Quetta at Utah State, Taco Fall quite literally blots out the rim. Like, it's a cloud blotting out the sun. It is unbelievable how difficult it is to score against Taco Fall when he is on the floor. Their 2-point percentage against over like the last, what is it? It's their 2-point percentage against like over the last 3 years is 7th, 6th, and 1st overall in the country, and that is mostly because of Taco Fall.
Yeah, I was watching a game. They played UConn. It was this weekend, and he was in the dunker spot on offense, and his head, you couldn't see it because he's so tall. His head was in the net like that. Like he is legitimately a lot taller than every other player that he plays against. Not just he's listed at 7'6", and I think he's all of 7'6".
Yeah, it's like funny. You compare him to someone like I'm just looking at their schedule. They played Jonte Porter. Like they could have played Jonte Porter, right? Who's like 6'11", 7 foot. So like the difference between Taco Fall and Jonte Porter, who is typically the tallest player on a college basketball court, is essentially the difference between Jonte Porter and a 6'4" combo guard. It's just like unbelievable in terms of how much taller he is than everyone else.
Yeah, and he's shooting 80% from 2 on the year. His footwork's okay, but the one thing that he definitely struggles with is shooting a free throw. So he's 28% from the foul line this year, and the shot looks pretty bad. But I
would be hacking him every time.
Yeah. I'm surprised teams don't do it. It's I guess kind of hard if you don't have front court depth. You don't have guys that can give up that foul. But yeah, sometimes they run stuff with very little movement that it's very obvious that it's for Taco Fall, so it's easy to foul if you want to. But I haven't seen a ton of teams do it. So anyone else, or are those your honorable mentions?
I mean, like, look, this is one of those things where I could go on all day because I just love watching so many of these like random college basketball players. Like the fact that we didn't have anyone from Tennessee on this list is like kind of crazy, just because Tennessee has 0 top 100 recruits on their team and is 3rd in the country, or at least like a top 10 team in the country. Ohio State is a very fun, interesting team that has a lot of these guys. I think, maybe Luther Muhammad might be their best long-term NBA prospect, but they're still like a top 20 team. One guy I do want to mention is Alex Robinson at TCU. That guy is going to make so much money in Europe as a distributor, ball screen point guard who can just spot out every single, essentially pass on the floor at any single given time. Their offense is a top 30 offense, essentially because he exists.
Yeah, I really like Jaylen Fisher last year. He's been hurt this year and haven't seen him too much, but last year I saw him against New Mexico in scout film, and he was killing their pressured D in New Mexico. So with those two, with a healthy Jaylen Fisher and with Robinson, and given Jamie Dixon's rebounding prowess as a coach, that team has a lot of upside, I think.
Yeah, like I think they just entered the top 25. I think they might be like a real like top 16-ish team in the country. Like there's not really any numbers that back that up for me. So like it's not a ridiculous statement, but I understand why people would be hesitant to say it. But when I saw them play USC and they just blew USC out of the water. You're right. Like, Dixon is such a great rebounding coach. That's actually something this team isn't super elite at, actually, despite the fact that they do have Jamie and, he does have that incredible track record. But they're so good on offense. Desmond Bane's one of the best shooters in the country. Jaylen Fisher has become a really good shooter. And the number with Jaylen Fisher that is most impressive this season is the fact that his turnover rate, he used to make the world's worst fucking decisions on the basketball floor. Like I would watch them and I would just get furious watching them because he'd like try and throw these miraculous, like up in the air passes because he got up in the air and got thrown into jail because he didn't have anywhere else he could go. 26% turnover rate as a freshman, 19% turnover rate as a sophomore. This season, they're playing him off the ball basically exclusively. 7.8% turnover rate. He is totally cut out all of the terrible bullshit in his game, and has become a really, really useful piece for them.
So last question here to put you on the spot. Does Kansas get at least a share of the Big 12 without Azubuike? What do you think?
I'm going to say no. I think this is the year. Between Iowa State and Texas Tech, who I would put a level above TCU this year. Maybe I'd put TCU pretty close to them, but like I think Iowa State and Texas Tech are just a little bit better than TCU. I've long said that I think Chris Beard is going to be the guy that breaks the streak because I think Chris Beard is one of the 10 best coaches in all of college basketball. I think they would have broken the streak last year if Keenan Evans didn't get hurt at the end of the year. If you made me pick one team right now to win the Big 12, I would say Texas Tech, but if you're giving me the field, I would say that Kansas's streak ends this year.
I think it's really close what the right pick is. I'll stay Kansas for now, but I definitely think it's a reasonable opinion to have it the other way. I don't know.
So here's what worries me about Kansas right now is their players don't really fit what Bill Self is used to running in a lot of ways. Like their most talented player, I still think, is Quentin Grimes, but Quentin Grimes is a guy that likes to have the ball in his hand, and you play him next to Devin Dotson, who is like maybe their third most talented player behind Deidre Lawson without Udoka Azubuike now, because you kind of have to play both of those two together. But whenever you slide Grimes into the wing position, it's just, he's a spot up shooter because that's what wings do in Bill Self's scheme. Right. So, and look, like Quentin Grimes hasn't like earned a ton of time on the ball. He's a 22% turnover rate right now. And like, you've watched Quentin Grimes, I'm sure he just hasn't been super impressive compared to what the lofty expectations that many, including myself, set forth for fans and set forth for him. But I think it's just tough whenever you have so many guys that are put into non-creator positions almost. Like Deidre Lawson is a great statistical accumulator, but he's not a guy that can like get his own shot that is super efficient all that effectively because he really struggles to get separation from guys because he's just not an athlete. And then LeGerald Vick shooting 45% from three. If you think that's going to hold up, good luck, man. Like good luck on LeGerald Vick, who they like sort of tried to run off at the end of last year and he had to beg his way onto the team again. So basically you're down to freshmen in Quentin Grimes and Devon Dotson, and those guys are good, but I don't know. I think this is the year. This looks like the year to me.
It will be interesting to see how they change now that Azubuike's definitely out for the year. The thing that the worst fit, I think, is Deidre Lawson now becomes the 5 in most cases anyways. And Bill Self's system is built on angles and deep post position. And from what I've seen, Dedrick Lawson does not have much interest in that. He's a guy, he likes to catch it. He likes to catch it on the mid post and slowly in his own way work for a shot. And that is kind of the opposite of what Bill Self has done in the past, where everything is in his offense functions to then seal you right by the basket. So on the one hand, I think that not having Azubuike clogging up the paint should help them offensively a little bit, but I think they have a lot of work to do to incorporate the new team that they now have, I guess.
Yeah, I think that they legit have to run like a totally different offense now. Like, I don't think that you can just post Dedrick. I think that you have to essentially play 5 out now, unless you want to start David McCormick, which, hey, I actually like David McCormick as a long-term piece. I think he's going to be a really good player for them, but I don't know if he's ready for this yet.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about this with Jesse Newell, but I will give Bill Self the benefit of the doubt. The last couple of years, he hasn't had the personnel that he wanted, and they have adjusted to, a Final Four last year. So we'll see. Don't write him off yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, Bill Self is one of the 5 best coaches in college basketball overall, probably. So, right off Bill Self at your own peril. But if it's going to happen one year, this feels like the year to me, because they were kind of messy throughout the entire course of the non-conference play with them without Udoka Azubuike. Your New Mexico State team played them within 3 points. And that's, look, Chris Jans has done an unbelievable job at New Mexico State, keeping up the slack from Marvin Menzies, and like Paul Weir as well was in there for a year, I guess. But man, New Mexico State isn't winning the Big 12 right now. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. And even that one really came down to the wire, but even games that didn't get that far, they just haven't really blown out bad teams, which is statistically a sign of a dominant team, is one that blows out teams they're supposed to blow out. So,
yep. Yeah, I think that's right.
So thank you very much. I'll read through our picks here. You went with, I gave you Jordan Ford to start and got Ethan Happ, Mike Dahm, Sam Merrill, and Chris Clemons. And I started with Frankie Ferrari, and had Josh Perkins, Jack Salt, Jordan Caroline, and David Scara. And then obviously we had all those honorable mentions. Thank you so much for coming on, Sam.
Jordan, anytime, man. It's super fun.
No hand checking Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc.